Welcome, everyone. We're so glad to see everyone. Thank you for coming. We are starting an informational webinar for faculty who have come from many different universities across the Commonwealth. We're so excited to have you all today. I'm going to ask you all to find the chat button at the bottom of your screen and go to the chat and introduce yourself with your name, your university, and if you teach a class that is community engaged, to tell us what that class is. Maybe there's more than one, or if it's research that you do that is community engaged. So welcome, everybody. As I'm waiting for everybody to be piling in here. And we are going to get started. So if we can go to the next slide. So what is this thing that you got invited to called the RAFT? Resilience, Adaptation, Feasibility Tool. Frankly, we just liked the acronym, and so we found words to use to get this acronym. We are a 3-university partnership. It's a pretty unusual bird, if you will. And we've been working together for 10 years. Founded in 2015. We've got 3 universities. I am Tanya Dankla-Cobb. I am director of the Institute for Engagement and Negotiation at UVA. And we have 2 other partners. I'm going to hand it to Wendy Stout, who will tell you about her center that's a partner.
Thank you, Tanya. Welcome to everyone. I'm so glad that you're able to meet with us and learn about RAFT, and we're so excited to share with you. So I'm Dr. Wendy Stout. I am the director of the Virginia Tech Coastal Collaborator Center, and we're located in Hampton, but we're affiliated with all of the wonderful faculty that are on campus in Blacksburg as well. And we're just so excited to share the RAFT with all of you. And I'll pass it back to Tanya.
Great, thank you, Wendy. And then a third partner that we have is unfortunately not able to be here today, is Dr. Jessica Whitehead, who is director of ICAR at, oh, Jess is here. Jess, do you want to say a word about, where are you? Show yourself. Say a word about yourself and your center as a partner, your institute, rather. If you're here, Jess, can you unmute? Maybe not. I will say she's introduced herself in the chat. Dr. Whitehead, director of the Institute.
I think she should be able to chat now if you try, Jess.
Jess has difficulties with audio, so I don't think she can talk right now.
Okay. She teaches research, hazard mitigation, resilience planning, and policies. The bottom line is that we, 3 universities, have been working for quite a while on how do we support communities from the ground up in identifying where their strengths are and where their gaps are, and how do we go about helping them address their gaps. You're going to hear a lot more about that from my colleague, Elizabeth Andrews. Let me go to the next slide. We want to show you where we've been working. You'll see on the left, rather on the right, is a list of our past localities. We've worked with 26 localities since 2015 in the Eastern Shore, in the Northern Neck, in the Middle Peninsula, as well as the cities of Hopewell and Petersburg. And now you'll see in the lower left box that we are expanding to do work in a different region, and moving out of the coastal region to work in the mountain region of Virginia, Southwest Virginia. We're working with Carroll County and Dickinson County, and we're also working with tribes. Very excited about that work as well. 2 federally recognized tribes of Rappahannock and Nansemond, Indian Nation, both of them, the Indian tribe and Indian Nation. And then we also are continuing to work in the coastal zone with 3 localities of James City County, Williamsburg, and York County. So we've learned a lot. We've adapted this tool through the years. It has not stayed static. And one of the things that we are doing that we feel will be addressing a really large need of these communities is finding faculty who want to be using their classes or research to and community engagement to serve the students growing and learning and to advance scholarship. And so there are so many needs of communities across the Commonwealth. That's our goal here today, is to identify faculty that want to enter this network, this roster, if you will, that we can call on to connect you with communities in need. And so with that, I will hand it over to Elizabeth Andrews.
Thank you, Tanya. I'm Elizabeth Andrews. I am a Law and Policy Fellow at the Institute for Engagement and Negotiation at UVA. I see a number of familiar names today. Thank you for joining us. The main goal here is to get you acquainted with the RAFT. What is it? What's the process? And how can we connect you and your important applied research and classwork to these communities in this statewide effort? So the RAFT is composed of 3 steps. The first one, concurrently, we do a quantitative scoring effort with a specially developed scorecard that we developed for the RAFT, and that assesses the resilience of a community. And concurrently, we do a qualitative assessment with focus groups and interviews. We then hold a community workshop where we share the results of the scoring and we get community input on what their resilience priorities are. And then we move to a year of implementation, which is when everybody stops and says, wait, you're sticking with the community for a year? Yes, we do. And I'm going to tell you more about that starting with the next slide. Thank you, Meredith. So again, concurrent quantitative and qualitative assessments. The qualitative part we added in after our initial round of the RAFT when we realized we needed to get more down in the grassroots input than just the list of folks that are usually put forward by the local government as the ones who are already very involved. We wanted to get further down in the grassroots. So we conduct focus groups and interviews. And then, as you can see from this circle, those are the 5 scoring areas of our scorecard. And we do have multiple questions within each category and give an overall score to the local government based on how much have they incorporated resilience into their policies, their leadership approaches, how much they collaborate with the Planning District Commission and like towns within their borders, et cetera, if they're a county, and their emergency management and risk assessment, infrastructure resilience, and planning. All of that those are areas that most people think about readily for resilience, but community engagement, health, and well-being is really a category that makes the RAFT different. We cover anything from how resilient is the community and prepared by having mental health services and food banks and physical medical needs met to how much are they engaging with the community. We found that's really a part of the resilience assessment, resilience writ large. Next slide, please, Meredith. Thank you. So then we present the results to the elected officials so that they are aware of the score for the local government. And then we have a regional workshop. We always do this in partnership with the Planning District Commission because they know the challenges and risks that are faced by that region. And at that workshop, we divide up into smaller groups by localities. And each locality's representatives come up with 3 to 5 priorities. So it's a community-led process. That's very important. That's another thing that's distinctive about the RAFT, that they pick out the items they want to work on for a year to increase their resilience. Next slide, please. And then we move into the year of implementation. We provide ongoing support. We schedule and facilitate, host monthly meetings online on Zoom The implementation team for each locality will meet. Each of our 3 universities divides and takes responsibility for one of the local governments or multiple ones. We do them separately so that there is a free exchange of information and ideas amongst the representatives of each locality. And it's important to note that that group the implementation team tends to grow throughout the year as the word spreads. Oh, so-and-so should be involved with the RAFT too. So that's a great thing. It provides further and further engagement with the community during the year. So that's how we can make connections to experts, to faculty, to implement the Resilience Action Checklist that was developed by the community at the workshop. And again, these are the different scorecard categories that you see in this circle graph. And we have made it representative of the types of implementation projects we do. So far, we've had about 22% of the implementation projects deal with community engagement, health and well-being, 15% for policy, leadership, and collaboration, et cetera, as you go around. As you can see, planning for resilience is a big part of this. And one of the gifts of the RAFT is engaging the full community and getting that resilience discussion going across the community and making those connections. Okay, next slide. Here's some examples of some of the implementation projects that we have done for communities. It can range from anything from mapping projected inundation areas from coastal and sea level rise flooding to on the Eastern Shore. It was very interesting. One of the communities said, we have so many rental houses, Airbnbs, we never know when someone's home when a looming disaster is coming our way, a looming natural hazard. So we came up with some magnets that they could put on their refrigerators so that they're always there, no matter if it's someone renting or it's the owner. They've always got that, where do we evacuate, who do we call in an emergency, etc. We do some law and policy research and economic research. And then the PREP tool is something that we developed that is a self-evaluation tool that local governments can use to assess their own resilience if they aren't ready to go through the full-blown RAFT. Next slide, please. So now we're going to have an expert panel to share with you their experiences in working on implementation projects for local governments through the RAFT. We have Dr. Wee Yusuf from Old Dominion University, professor and director of the School of Public Policy there. Karen Firehawk, she's a lecturer in urban and environmental planning at the University of Virginia, and she runs the Green Infrastructure Center. And then Dr. Tom Allen with Old Dominion University, professor of political science and geography. So we're going to hand it over to them to speak, each of them, for a few minutes, and then we will have a Q&A session. And I do want to note, please, throughout their discussion, which is going to be really informative, if you have any questions, please post them in the Q&A box. Thank you.
All right, well, I get to kick this off. So welcome, everyone. My name is Wee Yusuf. I'm a professor in the School of Public Service at Old Dominion University. I've done a lot of work in kind of coastal resilience much more broadly. And what I wanted to share with you in terms of thinking about projects where you or your students can undertake to support coastal resilience projects or resilience projects more broadly on the ground, I want to focus on 2 things. One is kind of the student experience. I was really thrilled to see in the audience, there are actually 2 of my former students who have in different ways been pulled into working on RAFT projects here and there over the duration of their graduate work at ODU. And so I think one of the things that really excites me is that by trying to get them engaged in these types of projects early on, they've now taken on from these projects, taking on their own types of coastal resilience research and their own coastal resilience projects. So it's a great opportunity to get students exposed to on-the-ground issues and on-the-ground challenges, working with communities, conducting research that then they can use to launch off onto their own paths in community type work or research in coastal resilience. So that's one big aspect that I think I wanted to share with you, one of the things that thrilled me, but also the projects that I work on for the RAFT communities in terms of implementing resilience related projects tend to focus on projects that when they start meet maybe very specific community needs, but then are ones that can also be leveraged to be applied to a wider range of communities. And therefore, while I might have started with a small project, the opportunity to create broader and wider and maybe longer lasting impacts from that kind of preliminary work with a specific community. So I'm in the School of Public Service, and my expertise or interests are primarily in community resilience, emergency and disaster management, equity, climate adaptation, and public engagement and communication. So related to those topics, for example, my students have worked on projects that examine best practices for public engagement on living shorelines that we did for the Eastern Shore, or risk communication for engaging with vulnerable communities, for example, the homeless population and lower income populations in Portsmouth, Virginia. So a lot of projects that my students can do that really relate to that area of their interest and my interest. But in terms of making a difference, these are projects that the RAFT gives you this opportunity to work with specific communities, but then creating these products that have utility for other communities. So here I have some example of graphics that show emergency risk communication planning for coastal counties. This is a template that I developed that could be applied primarily in the Northern Neck, but then thinking of broader coastal communities, how then this template would also be something that could be used by other localities as well. The small business resilience products were those that I developed based on needs of localities, specific locality in the Northern Neck. But once that tool was developed, we've now been able to, with some additional funding is always great, to be able then to use these resources to conduct workshops on the Northern Neck and then Mid Peninsula, on the Eastern Shore here in Norfolk, and applying that and helping businesses use these tools to become more resilient. Can we go to the next slide? And so the other part of the work more recently that I've been involved in is supporting hazard mitigation planning and resilience planning. For example, consulting during the process of updating hazard mitigation planning. Some localities or a region wanted to develop a resilience plan, and so my role was to compile resources and materials for them to develop that resilience plan. And then Elizabeth and I supervised students developing a resilience planning tool, the PREP tool that she mentioned earlier. So the purpose of this kind of short discussion was really just kind of give you a range of the different types of projects that I've been able to use that kind of take advantage or leverage my expertise or my interest, or that helps me build my research more with kind of community input, but also projects that students can do as class projects or summer projects. There are lots of different things that can be done to help the RAFT and to help the localities in terms of these projects. So my 5 minutes is up. I'll hand it off to, I think, Karen is next.
To Karen, yes, thanks.
Thanks very much. Yes. And I'll go quickly. I was told to have 3 minutes, so that's all I'm going to take, hopefully. Tanya knows I can barely say my name that fast. But anyway, I teach at the University of Virginia, and I teach green infrastructure themed classes, which are really looking at nature as infrastructure to help us with stormwater management and buffering against storms and infiltrating water and providing shade and combating urban heat island, all the wonderful services that nature provides. And so I have 2 courses. One is at the city scale, where we focus on nature as infrastructure, and we look at all these different things: trees, water, wetlands, parks, and other natural features. And then what we do is we actually create a map of all these resources for the whole city using images, and then we add additional features that are important to the community. And so the students are actually creating this green infrastructure map and then creating a strategy for how to link these different parks and other habitats together across the city. So it's really about mapping and then creating priorities. And the final product is a strategic plan for the city on how they can best conserve these resources. And so RAFT's role in that project has been to identify cities that say, well, we would actually like to use our nature as infrastructure? How can we do that? And that's an example where they might call me and say, Karen, can we plug you in here? So Colonial Beach, for example, was an example of a city that wanted to look at the whole city. And then they moved into the next semester, which is the site scale project. So that's green infrastructure sites. And so in that class, we focus on specific sites like an old degraded shopping mall that's derelict and no one wants to use it anymore, or massive parking lot that perhaps there's a buried creek underneath that is causing flooding problems. So we look at these degraded or forgotten urban spaces, or it could just be just a city park that's terrible, it has no trees and no failing infrastructure. And what we do is then look at how could that be reimagined, be an infiltrative landscape that is resilient and that also meets community needs. So we use RAFT scorecard, again, to tell us, well, these are the things the community said were important, or these were the spaces and places that they prioritized. So in the Colonial Beach example, after we mapped the whole city, they then identify specific sites that we could, or streets that we could redesign and reimagine. And so we provide those conceptual designs. They're not engineered to the point of being construction ready. We are not a contracting firm. So yeah, you can go to the next slide. So in short, RAFT serves as a conduit to match locality needs to our capacity at the University of Virginia, as well as I have a center called the Green Infrastructure Center that actually evolved out of this class. And so here's an example at right, just some cutouts from a little park in Warsaw, Virginia. They asked us to help them reimagine that no one's using. And so that's not the whole report because I don't have time for that, but just, how would they use it? Where are the trails? Where are the pathways going? What's the plant palette? Do they need to take up some contaminated areas and fix them? And go to the next slide.
One more minute, Karen.
Yep.
Thank you.
And then this is Eleanor Park, which was a vacant lot. There was a lot of controversy around it. Some people said we should develop it. Some people said, why would we develop this treasure? And from a coastal resilience standpoint, I mean, it's in the flood zone, so it's not a great idea to put more structures on there. There were a lot of issues. So our role was to be design assistants, to talk to the community about what's important and use the RAFT scorecard to build those resilience elements in. So next slide. So we just reimagined some of the spaces, activate them, and we did this park as a series of different outdoor rooms. Next. So essentially what we did was just to try to help them reimagine it. And indeed, it became one of their #1 projects that they want to do. And I looked at the current plan for it. It's got a lot of those swirling pathways and things that we suggested. And it was very controversial because some people did not want a park. They thought we should make money. So we had to make the argument that parks do increase real estate value and do make your community more desirable and attractive and lead to better economic outcomes. So I think that's all I had.
Thank you, Karen. Tom, I think you're up.
Yeah. Hey, thanks for having me, and nice to see a lot of new and familiar faces there in the participants. We had the fortune of the RAFT having been done at the kind of scorecard phase in town of Colonial Beach and the Northern Neck a couple of years, and I heard about that and saw a great opportunity to embed that in some classes and some top-notch students I was working with. In particular, I think Tanya's had done some work already in the town. We had no shortage of potential problems to tackle, but so we kind of convened a group of students that I had in a coastal applied GIS class. We had been working on a lot of things like shoreline mapping, coastal change analysis with, say, LiDAR, aerial photography, and I also had acquired a recent autonomous surface vessel for mapping bathymetry or hydrography. So you put all that into a blender and you take it to a community, and what you get is a pretty neat applied project done in a short order. with a master's student from Ocean Earth Science, an undergrad from Mechanical and Aerospace Engineering, and then a couple staff assistants and a couple even GIS students. So very interdisciplinary, somewhat mimicking the real world. The challenge we picked was some of the beaches of Colonial Beach. It's kind of midway along the Potomac. I later learned it's one of the most fastest eroding areas in the Chesapeake Bay in terms of town development. And it had some prior work by VIMS on some shoreline studies. It had a bountiful amount of data from post-Sandy LiDAR mapping to shoreline data. I also learned it's adjacent to Dahlgren Naval Weapons Station, and the water is actually the property of the state of Maryland. So I possibly broke some Maryland laws not knowing that until after the fact. Interesting. You can excuse me, Elizabeth. The challenge was a beach town with an erosion problem, and only a Band-Aid approach to that by kind of periodic beach nourishment applications. And you do see some hardened structures. So we sought to quantify that, the rate of change, the volume of change, and the transport and deposition associated with that by combining drones in the air and drones in the water and historic change analysis. Next slide. So over the course of about 4 to 6 months, we did 2 or 3 trips, and we basically built a set of GIS data, applied some tools. As you see in the middle, that's our Hydrone, an autonomous surface vessel that has a little ping sonar, and it basically runs like a robot and maps the bottom. We bring that data back into the GIS, and the students then perform these mission plans and did the kind of a GIS analysis to do that. They then stitched that together with drones that flew over the air, uncrewed aerial vehicles, and then they stitched together the topography and the bathymetry and did a change analysis versus some prior work post-Hurricane Sandy that had quantified it from, it was called a topobathymetric LiDAR. So the town got a great quality product. In that analysis, students learned a lot about these tools and techniques. Alex eventually did this as a capstone project for her master's, and later won best paper or poster at the Virginia GIS conference. And we even inserted some of this into a book chapter publication. Next slide. Should be some
One more
results.
minute, Tom.
Yep. So our final results, it was put into a pretty comprehensive report. It shows the quantified the shoreline change, the erosion, and the deposition in some cases. We also had the students put some error bars around this. So there's a tool they used that sort of bounds it and puts a probability onto that. And interesting, in the image on the right, the two of those identified some of the patterns. So we saw some scouring, and the town had a de facto boardwalk that had been undermined and was crumbling, acting as a makeshift seawall. And we identified some scour. So in the long run, the town got the benefit of a GIS data sets. They could plug this into their GIS staff and utilities, and they could basically have a little better baseline. I'll finally say that it was great to have students lead the charge on this, because as a faculty member, sometimes you go into these communities, you don't have the connections, you can maybe intimidate or scare people off, or vice versa. And the students were kind of the ace to have for this successful project. Look forward to doing more, and I encourage the rest of you to hop onto the RAFT.
Thank you to all 3 of our experts. That was terrific. Great examples of really of applied research out in the field. I'm going to hand it over to Tanya to facilitate our question and answer session. Did see a number of questions in the chat, Tanya. I don't know if you
Yeah.
have any.
Yeah, we've been having some really Good discussion back and forth from a question that was put forward by Tom Benzing out of James Madison University. And didn't know you were emeritus now, Tom, but congratulations and glad to see you. So we have no questions in the question in the box. The way you find the Q&A box is you would go to maybe it's showing up at the very bottom of your screen, or maybe you have to click on the three dots where it says more, depending on how big your screen is. But you can type in questions into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Here comes one. How are faculty going to be, or how have they been connected with items from each locality? Awesome question. I'll give a quick answer and let anybody on our team add in. In the past, it has been through our personal connections. And because we are 3 universities working together, our connections are larger than any one of ours. But that's the reason for this roster is that we now have, and we are planning to go back and work with the first 26 localities to do an assessment. And in that process of assessing where they are now and evaluating the process, we are hoping to be able to connect them with needs they may still have. And we anticipate all of them will still have a great deal of needs. And so that is why we wanted to be more systematic and opening up the roster to people from universities across the Commonwealth with a broad range of skills and expertise. It's an idea. We don't know if it'll work. We think it could and should, and it would be fabulous for us to be able to be a conduit. I think that's the word that we used, a conduit for faculty to be connected with specific community needs to support them. So we will be making these connections. If you sign up for the roster and tell us the kinds of skills and expertise that you wish to offer, then that is, once we identify that kind of a need, we would be in touch with you. That's the basic premise of this. Okay, I'm seeing a whole bunch of questions, so I'm going to keep going on. I see the second question that came in is from Raihan Khan. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. And it's not a question. Here we go. Plans for the Shenandoah Valley on environment and health. Elizabeth, I'm gonna let you just so it's not me droning on. You and I can go back and
Okay.
forth. Yeah.
So one thing that's important to note, I mentioned this earlier, is that we always partner with the Planning District Commission. They know the risks, they know the challenges, they know the resources that their communities have or don't have as far as resources. And so really, we have worked so far in the RAFT in the areas where the PDCs have expressed an interest in partnering on this. So right now, the Hampton Roads Planning District Commission, the Historic Triangle, 3 localities are working with us. Sometimes it's a capacity issue, honestly, even at the local level and the PDC level, depending on at the time when we approach them about the RAFT. But we have worked with the Accomack Northampton PDC, Northern Neck, Middle Peninsula. We would like to get into the Shenandoah Valley. I think that would be great. I think we all would agree on that. It's just a matter of we would like to do that in partnership with the planning district commissions that might be involved in that region. So first of all, if you have connections with the planning district commissions there, it would be great if you could share those, if you have worked with them in any of your research, and get us a local foot on the ground there to talk to someone to see if they'd be willing to participate. That would be great.
Yeah, awesome. And as someone said in here, Karen said, resilience can be worked on anywhere. We have had requests for working with different places in different parts of the state, including Northern Virginia. And this is part of why we're trying to create a roster, because the need is exceeding what we as a 3-university team can really provide in terms of addressing very specific needs on the ground. So that's our hope for the roster. I notice Elizabeth Dotson-Shoup down at UVA Wise is saying it would be great to incorporate an education and public school focus for the RAFT. We have had people from the schools participate in the qualitative assessment, I believe, and schools have been part of the identification of priorities. I believe that we've even had 1 or 2 projects that have occurred at schools, but I could be wrong, or through the schools through the years. But yes, totally possible to be having something relating to a school. I know one of the things that was interesting was when we were working in the Middle Peninsula and we had a foundation. This is something else to be thinking about. If you know of foundations that are in your region that would support, resilience projects, we had one in the Middle Peninsula, and they gave a big chunk of funding that went directly to on the ground community-based organizations that were going to implement projects. What our role was to review the proposals and identify, who got what. One of those proposals was to restore a Rosenwald school, to contribute towards the restoration of it, because of its importance in sort of tourism and other aspects of what they consider to be their community resilience. They made the priority, they made the case that this was connected to resilience. So, okay. Let's move on to other questions. Let me just see here.
Tanya, the one that remains, Athena Kings, we just put something in the chat to address that, FYI.
Okay.
And I want to add also that one of the main reasons we do the focus groups and the interviews is to try to get into the grassroots of the community and approach some of our more socially and physically vulnerable communities that may not be the first name offered up by the local government to participate in the project. They're not as used to working with them. So I think the answer is yes, we do try to, but always open to further suggestions on that.
And thank you, Sierra. If you look in the chat, Sierra has mentioned, I knew I wasn't making it up. She's mentioned specific projects in the Middle Peninsula relating to work with students for a River Day for students to learn about resilience issues and connections to the river. So I'm just scanning through here to see if we have other questions. Let's see here, anything else that we need to, please don't be bashful. Here I see another question. To what extent have these measures been applied to lower income communities? And if not, is there a plan to do so? I want to tell you, I don't know whether you've answered this question in another place, but virtually, we would consider, I think without exception, all of the communities that we've worked with are what we call under-resourced, tremendously under-resourced. They are rural. Some of them had no staff, a volunteer mayor, of a small town. And even if they were designated a township or a city, many had far below the kinds of staff that they needed. And so definitely all of them are under-resourced. Many of them have what we would call very vulnerable communities in different ways, and how they think about vulnerability includes race. It also includes culture. It also includes age. And in one of the communities, it was an unusual thing nobody had really thought about, which is the Mennonite community with no communication. How do they get, or the Amish rather, in the Northern Neck, how do they get notified if there's no communication systems? So there are different kinds of vulnerabilities that are being assessed during this process. Hopefully that's helpful. Other questions? Other questions? Let me just see. Elizabeth, if you see any other questions, please don't hesitate to dig in here. Are there any questions about logistics here? Any other questions? I'm shocked that we might have run out of questions so quickly.
Well, I just posted another answer to Athena. Did that go through? Yes, it did. I just wanted to flag that for you, Athena, that another thing that we do through the RAFT, by the way, is in that year of implementation, the year of meetings, monthly online, we bring in state agencies that are relevant to the items on the Resilience Action Checklist. So for example, in the Northern Neck, septic came up frequently, inundated septic as an issue as part of their Resilience Action Checklist items. So the local health department assigned someone who came to the implementation team meetings to let people know about the grants that are available. And about, and VIMS talked, Virginia Institute of Marine Science talked about some septic inundation mapping they've been doing. DCR's Shoreline Erosion and Advisory Service, DCRCs, they received a federal grant to work on shoreline erosion control and management with low-income residents. And the staff person there, Aaron, was extremely happy because he was able to connect through the RAFT to some lower income residents that could use the federal grant funds. So I think there are plenty of times when at Department of Transportation, we brought in to the Eastern Shore to talk to the towns about their flooding roads. So there are ways to connect with the state agencies as well. And if you have research that can help support their programs, they often will welcome that.
Yeah. We have a question for Karen that has come up from Tom Benzing. What's the timeline for working with one of your classes on mapping?
Yeah, that's a good question. Sorry, I didn't say that. Yeah, so we like to pick the community the season before. So for the fall, if we can pick them sometime in late spring, and then we work with them from the start of the semester in August, in late August into early December, and then we wrap up all our products and provide them by the end of December or early January. And then the spring, and that's the citywide or town-wide study. And then in the spring, it's the same thing. It's the semester. So we start designing projects in late February. So I teach them some things before I set them to self-design. And then we provide them products in mid-May. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think that would be our hope is that now, before I say more, Tom, what was your timeline? So we connected with you and actually I think you were able to complete it within the same semester.
Yeah, more or less. I think I had a tip off that the scorecard was finishing up November and then launched into it, really in January, February. But we did have to finish things up in the summer. So a semester and a half, let's say.
Okay.
Since we have a year of implementation, that can accommodate that kind of schedule. But Tom, didn't you do that? Tell me if I'm wrong. Didn't you do that with research assistants, not with a class per se?
I did have some assistance because we had acquired the hydrone and needed some supplies. So actually, I parlayed this into some funding. I guess I would say that from Virginia Institute for Spaceflight and Autonomy. I think the RAFT there was more than a trickle of support, and CCRFR, the Commonwealth Center for Recurrent Flooding Resilience, helped me out with I think it was some software and some travel, because it was like a 3-hour drive for us. So
Yeah,
we did a couple trips, and that helped a lot.
Yeah,
thank you. I was just pointing that out because it doesn't have to be a class, just so you all know.
Right.
It could be research, yeah.
and so Tom, a follow-up to this is saying, just to sort of clarify this, so the scorecard process has to come before working with, say, a Karen Firehawk or a Tom Allen. And the answer is yes, is that scoring and the qualitative assessment both result in identifying the strengths in that community and the gaps. And then the community identifies what their priorities are. And at that point, we would be able to say, oh, their priority is mapping the shoreline. Oh, we've got Tom Allen and let's connect with him. Or they need a site design. Let's connect with Karen. That is the point that we would be wanting to look at the faculty roster to see who offers what expertise. And our hope is that we would be able to address perhaps even more of the priorities that have been identified than the top 5. If we see something that's number 6 and we've got somebody who can do it and we just hand it off, that seems like a win for everybody.
Tanya,
I
actually,
noticed, yeah, go ahead, Elizabeth.
actually, it's we. Can I go first, Elizabeth?
Absolutely.
I just wanted to say that there's a question in the Q&A that asks about faculty, whether faculty have supported the RAFT initiatives, either how they funded that work through internal
Yeah.
grants or through their own research dollars. And I figured Tom already talked a little bit about how his work was funded. A lot of the work that I have done to support the RAFT from a research perspective has primarily been my research time as a faculty member. But some of the other work has leveraged other, for example, NSF funding for work on living shorelines. It was easy to extend that work to look at, best practices for public education about living shorelines. So I think it's very much a matter of kind of leveraging what resources, what funding might already have. But I do want to just give a shout out to the Commonwealth Center for Recurrent Flooding Resiliency, because CCRFR funded quite a bit of the small business resilience work, the development of the small business resilience uh, guide and toolkit, and then funded the workshops that allowed us to take the products out to different communities, and so that small businesses could use the products that were being developed. So I think there's a range of different ways that faculty have supported and continued to sustain the work that maybe started with a RAFT project.
Right.
Yeah. Go ahead. Are you going to add on to that, Elizabeth?
I was going to mention one other thing, Tanya, and follow up to what you said, which is, we developed this opportunity list for each locality. As Tanya said, we look at the scorecard, we look at the results of the focus groups and the interviews. We also look at their comprehensive plan and their hazard mitigation plan. And we look for opportunities to present to the local government's representatives at the workshop. We found in the first round, when we didn't present an opportunity list, when we were on the Eastern Shore, it's very hard to start the conversation with a bunch of people in the room and say, what would you like to do to work on resilience for a year? So we found if we trigger that conversation by saying, okay, here are what some current tools and plans already show that you could work on, that helps to jumpstart the conversation. As Tanya mentioned, let's say they come up with 3 to 5 items and number 6 is septic and somebody's a septic specialist, that we could refer a faculty member or a researcher to that, if that's something that they could help with as well. I don't want to neglect the tribes. We mentioned early on that we're working with the tribes. And then in my presentation, I focused mainly on local governments and their projects we can do and implementation in their geographic area. But the tribes in Virginia have their own process that we do with them, and they have their own needs. And that's also an opportunity to support them and help them.
Yeah. There's a question here that's related to all of this in terms of how it would impact faculty that are on the roster, which is how many communities do we work with each year? And what's the timeline for them, for bringing them in? And the answer is, it depends. We have worked with, I think one year we did 9 communities, 3 between each of the universities, 3 each. And we've worked with between, 2 localities to 9 localities. Right now, we have 3 localities in the historic triangle. We have 2 in Southwest Virginia, and we have 2 tribes. And all of them are on a slightly different timetable. Because the funding is starting in different places. For a variety of reasons, they're starting in different places. It also helps us to not all, having so much scoring to happen at the same time. But 6 months is usually the amount of time for the qualitative and quantitative scoring and workshop to occur, between 6 to 8 months, and then a year of implementation. That's and then if we are able to, which we believe we will, if we are able to do the assessment of the first batch of alumni, of 26 alumni localities, that would be quite a good number of localities within the same year period that where needs might be surfaced. So that could be a year of a lot of things needing to be addressed, all at the same time. We know, and because we're at universities, we know, and we are able to tell our localities that, if we're able to match you with somebody, it might be the next semester before they can get started.
Right.
Because we know you can't turn a class syllabus around necessarily within a month or 2. Sometimes some can, depending on the nature of the class, but some can't. Some need to get what's happening lined up, 4 or 5 months in advance. So we know that, and we're able, and localities are so under-resourced, and they've waited for so long, and they don't have money to do it otherwise. It's like, it's okay. We can wait till the fall, or we can wait till the spring. That's what we have heard, is that's not a problem. We will do it on their calendar. And so I'm just trying to assure you that it's not like it's going to be, some federal grant or state grant where you have to deliver within a certain amount of time. This is a different situation. Unless Karen has her own independent funding because she runs the Green Infrastructure Center. Karen might be on a different timetable, but.
Tanya, I know we have one more question, but just being cognizant of the time, is it okay if I do the quick wrap up of what next steps look like?
Well, I do see one more question. Maybe we can answer that, and then we can do that.
Or Tanya, I
Um,
can answer that in the chat if that's
Okay.
helpful.
Yeah, we
Okay,
also can follow up with you, Wesley, and via email as well.
okay. And because others can't see the question and they might be curious, I'd like to at least tell people that the question is around scholars from the humanities. And, have we had people from the humanities contributing, and what interdisciplinary work has looked like? We have a project right now on the Eastern Shore that is incredibly interdisciplinary, and we have we have story maps, we have oral histories, we have music and art being contributed to this project, on the Eastern Shore. We are very open to the humanities and what they can bring to this project. I very much want to emphasize that. All right, Meredith.
Yeah, so I'm so appreciative of you all making some time on a Wednesday afternoon. When we started this process and started advertising, we did not expect quite the just onrush of interest, and we're so excited to work with you all in order to follow up appropriately and to kind of figure out which of our many team members might be the most relevant to talk to you next. We've asked that you fill out this very short survey. It's really just your contact information and then 2 questions, which are, what's your interest? Do you have classes you teach? Do you have research interest in this? Do you have experience in this? It's an opportunity for you to tell us about you. And then the last question is, what more do you need to know from us? Is there information you might need about funding? Is there information you might need about schedule or region you want to work in? This is a great place. I know a couple of you brought up the Shenandoah Valley to give us contact information that, I really specifically want to work here. Can we talk more about that? And we will prioritize over the next several weeks. Give us some time. There's a lot of you trying to follow up and schedule either calls, Zoom calls, whatever, coffee chats, making sure that we touch base. Our faculty roster is really something we take pride in and something that we want to make sure that we know everyone on there and can really speak to how much they understand us and we understand them. And so we want to make sure we have that personal touch as much as possible. You'll see, I'll put my email in the chat, but you'll also see in just a second, Sierra is going to send out a poll. It's just a quick exit poll that says, are you still interested? And that way I have, for anyone who's not interested, I have the list of people who would like to maintain the contact with us. You also are welcome at any point in time to email me, and I will follow up as best I can. There have been a couple email issues, so I'll also put the RAFT general email. So we're so thankful again for your time and look forward to talking with you more.
Yeah, and thank you again. I love Elizabeth thanking our panelists. Thank you so much for coming and being with us today. Really means a lot. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. And please do send in any questions you might have, and we'll do our best to answer them.